Right, Sarah McAdam of the Transition Network. Can you tell us, Sarah, a bit about the Transition Network? I'm sure some people will know it, some people won't. Explain a little bit about what you are and how you're reacting to this resilience agenda, which is emerging alongside mitigation, not trying to replace it, but emerging alongside it.
Yes. I'll stand up because I've got some photos to show you. But it's always a bit of a risk about whether I'm going to be able to see over the top of a lectern. It seems to be okay. I should say before I start, I struggled a bit when I was preparing this presentation, and I'd been asked to come and talk about some inspiring stories of communities doing stuff in this field, and I didn't struggle with that. That's my meat and drink, if you like. But I did struggle with the frame around adaptation. So I'm just going to come clean about that and say, I talked to a wise colleague who said, well, maybe we just need to redefine it. And because I think for communities working in this area, that sort of distinction about, well, is this adaptation, is this mitigation, doesn't necessarily make sense. That's not how they're working. So I use this, title here to say that what I want to talk about is I want to tell you some stories of communities that are adapting to and helping to create a world in which we can live well. And when I say a world in which we can live well, I have taken it as a given that living well involves finding ways to live that don't create unsustainable, irreversible damage to the planet on which we all depend for life. So I'm bringing both of those things together and saying these are stories of communities that are adapting. And what feels exciting to me is it's stories of communities who are thinking about where they want to be in the future and making change happen. Just to explain, Transition Network's a very small charity. We work to inspire, support and connect the transition movement. Some of you may have heard of it in terms of transition towns, which is a movement that started in Totnes in Devon just under 10 years ago, but has spread from Totnes all over the UK and then beyond. It's spread sort of virally all over a number of continents now. So there are thousands of transition towns, transition initiatives that have popped up in unexpected places, entirely undirected by our charity. We're just there to try and connect it and support people to learn from each other about what they're doing. This slide here shows our new book, and I'm going to be talking about this today. When we were coming up to the COP21 negotiations in Paris, we were thinking, well, what are we going to do about this? What's our role and the transition movement? And we decided that what we wanted to do was collect stories that celebrate what's already happening on the ground in communities, that demonstrate the potential and start conversations about how this can be supported and extended and supported to create more impact. And we wanted to do that both as an invitation to others to get involved, to say this is something that you might want to do in your place, but also because we thought there may be something here that could possibly infuse, inspire our political leaders, help them find the courage that they need to find and the vision to take the sort of action that's needed in Paris and beyond. So actually to be saying to them, you're behind the curve here, and that there are communities and people all over the world that are already taking this seriously and imagining different ways of living. And why we think sort of the community is important is because this feels like the level of scale where we as citizens can actually engage with these huge, global, complex, wicked problems. So actually, it can feel, I don't know about the rest of you, but even just hearing what we've been talking about this evening can feel overwhelming. It can feel disempowering. It can feel too complex to get your head around. But there's something about coming together with your neighbours and reimagining how this place might work in a way that's more sustainable, more resilient, that actually feels manageable on a human level. So a few very quick examples. I'm going to see whether this, There you go. A few examples of stories that we collected. What we did was we went out to the movement and said, tell us things that you want us to celebrate in the run-up to COP21. We've put it all together in this book, and on our website we're putting out a different story every day in the 21 days leading up to the start of the negotiations in Paris. So the first story is about these people in Scotland. In transition, these are all members of the Transition Black Isle group in Scotland. Black Isle is a peninsula, in case you don't know, in the Scottish Highlands. Many of the residents there work in Inverness, so there's a high level of car use because of that need to commute regularly to Inverness. And as with many of the stories of transition, this started with an opportunity being spotted in terms of something that was happening in the local area. So the Kessock Bridge, which was the route to Inverness, was needing to be repaired, and this was going to really reduce the capacity for traffic across that bridge. So it was going to cause all sorts of traffic disruption. And the transition group in Black Isle got together and saw this as an opportunity to really do a major campaign about reducing car use. And they set themselves what you might think was quite an ambitious target, which was they wanted to reduce car use by 1 million miles. That's what they set. They set themselves a 3-year process to do that because they recognise that that sort of behaviour change takes time. It doesn't happen quickly, and certainly to do that in a way that is then sustained long term, it takes time. And they set off on this challenge in August 2012. They did all sorts of events and activities. I can't possibly tell you everything that they did as part of this process, but it was all geared towards raising confidence about cycling. It was geared towards getting people to try something and then feeling that sort of support from the community to carrying on with it. So they did arrange for loans of bikes, they arranged for doctor bike sessions where you could get your bike repaired. They had bike buses where children went to school on bikes together, and they had a bike fest every year, which sounded like a rather amazing experience. They also were focusing on car share as well as cycling. And there's lots of statistics. They did a actually pretty rigorous baseline at the beginning of the process and an assessment at the end of the process. And there's all sorts of impressive statistics about the impact that they had. But the key one was that they met their target. So they reduced, in those 3 years, they reduced the miles travelled by their community by 1,352,277 miles in that small place and that small group of people. So that, I think, if we were using that binary mitigation adaptation model, that's a mitigation process. That's about reducing carbon emissions in that place. I'm going to move on to an example of communities getting together to adapt. Here I'm going not to the UK, I'm going to Sao Paulo in Brazil. And the story of 2 very different transition groups in one city, in that one city. So that's a city where we were already talking about drought, but that's a city that's been experiencing a record 3-year low in rainfall, and occasional when there is rain, partly because of the deforestation around the city, that rain being really unmanageable in the impact that it has, so torrents of water that cause real disruption to the city. And these 2 transition groups are in very different areas of the city, and the impact they felt from this drought was very different. And I think, for me, this feels like quite an interesting illustration of that sort of impact of the fact that adaptation will mean different things for different people. So the 2 groups are Transition Granja Viana, which is in quite an affluent part of Sao Paulo, in a middle-class, upper-class area. And in that part of Sao Paulo, the residents there all have internal water tanks, and they actually, in many ways, didn't experience much of the difficulties as a result of drought. As we were discussing earlier, they were insulated from it by their wealth. They were able to store water and use it safely. And then the other transition group is in Brasilândia, which is one of the favelas in Sao Paulo, so a very poor area, sort of slum area as it's described. And there, the droughts had a huge and terrible impact, where people have been really suffering from the lack of water and have set up sort of ad hoc, makeshift rainwater collection apparatus, and they haven't had the knowledge or the resources to make sure that that water is safe. So there's been a real increase in dengue fever as a result of that sort of collection of water in a way that's unfiltered and uncovered. And one of the things that I think feels really inspiring about these two groups is that they came together, and the people in the affluent area recognised that they didn't want to be using this precious resource that they had in a way that felt wasteful and unacceptable, particularly when their neighbours down the road were suffering so much from the lack of water. And they worked together to develop safe rainwater collection systems and to find ways to get those installed in houses in both those communities. So for the richer people, this was about a conscious choice to use this resource more wisely, and recognising the sort of the value of that resource that they'd been a bit unconscious about previously. And for the people in the favela, this was about actually getting safe access to a basic need. I'm going to move on. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Transition Streets project, which again started in the UK. So the Transition Streets project started in Totnes, and this is a way of neighbours getting together and exploring together in their neighbourhood what are the ways that how are things going to change, what do they see as the key issues in terms of energy, food, water, etc. And doing that on a street-by-street level. So people come together. It was a model that was developed in Totnes. People come together over sort of 7 days, seven times over a series of weeks in each other's houses, and they go through a workbook and explore the issues together and start to understand them, and then think about, well, what practical things can we do differently in this place? And for me, again, so one of the interesting things about this story is that in Totnes, this resulted in 500 households went through the process. They all cut their carbon dioxide emissions by, in total, 1.3 tonnes per year as that group. There was an average saving per household of around £600 for each household as the result of this process that they'd gone through. But the impact that they were most interested in, and the one that they most often quoted when the researchers went back to talk to them about what was the benefit of doing this process, was about getting to know their neighbours and about feeling connected to others sort of in their street in a way that they'd lost contact with as in that community. And this model has spread, as I say, all over the UK, but it's now been taken up in other parts of the world. This picture is people in Australia who've picked up the model. And again, the same thing, we've seen the same thing in all of these places, that people are able to change behaviour because they're supporting each other, and there's a process that they're going through, and they're feeling empowered by that connection with their neighbourhood. They're making significant changes that are having an impact in their consumption and in the impact that they're having on the world, and they're feeling benefits anyway. You know, they're feeling that actually we would have wanted to do this whether we had achieved those benefits or not. And the example in Newcastle in Australia was a street where there was really quite a lot of tension between student houses in the street and other residents, and the different lifestyles there were really not gelling well. Lots of unhappiness about noise from the student households and people coming and going late at night. And one of the things they found when they came together was that they started to relate to each other as human beings. They started to find out a bit more about each other. It became clear that some of the non-student residents were really quite nervous about being in that street late at night. And the students were saying to them, well, actually, we're around at that time. We're up and about, and we'll keep an eye out for you. And there were examples of, for example, somebody who was threatened with assault was about to be assaulted, and the students in the household came out and stopped the assault happening. And they were saying, we wouldn't have been looking for that. That's an entirely unexpected benefit of this activity. But what it's created is a neighbourhood where people look out for each other. So I'm going to sort of stop there, I think. But I'll just show you. So these are the stories that we've collected from around the world that we're highlighting in the run-up to Paris. I'm not even going to attempt to go through all of those, but that's all the different unexpected benefits, expected and unexpected benefits that we found from just those 21 stories. And I guess what my message to you is that actually this change is happening. Communities are showing an incredible ability to adapt and to imagine change, and I think a much greater ability to do that than many of our political leaders, to really question assumptions, such as, one of the sort of key assumptions that I would argue we need to be questioning is an assumption that we can keep growing and growing when we live on a finite planet. So actually you find that assumption questioned really quite easily at a community level in many of the communities that I've been talking to and working with in a way that is sort of unacceptable at a sort of level of our political leadership. So I'm saying I think there's change happening here. It's happening at a community level, and I think we're ahead of the curve, and that the politicians need to wake up and get with the programme. Thanks.